We came, we saw, we kicked its ass.
Simon West's latest action film, Stratton, arrives in cinemas on Friday. And Simon, congratulations on the film. A really British action movie for a change, I think. And of course, you're something of an action movie specialist anyway. So I wondered what the appeal for you was of that type of film. Is it the sort of thing you go and see at the cinema yourself?
Well, it isn't necessarily what I rush out to see, but the British part of it was really important. And actually, I'm much more likely to go and see a British action film because I'm a big James Bond fan and all those kind of films. And so, and I grew up on that, and I think that's what made me interested in films as a child was James Bond, because that was about the only cool action film, and it happened to be British when I was growing up. And so this was definitely grabbed me because of the Britishness of it, and also I think there's a real gap for another British hero. We've got James Bond, but the Americans have got Mission Impossible and the Bourne franchise, and I think we need another one. And there's plenty of scope for a variation on a British hero. So I was looking for quite a few years actually for some sort of strong character that was in this world, and I wasn't sure whether it was going to be a military themed thing or a spy themed movie, but when this project came along, it fitted all the requirements. It was British, it was action, it was cool, and it was very realistic, which is the other thing. So what the difference, I suppose, this is between the James Bond franchise is that it's more realistic, but keeping all the excitement, and so nothing happens in it that couldn't really happen, and it's also done with enormous input from the Special Forces unit, the SBS, and also the intelligence services, which we can't really do officially, but everything is researched and based on the books of Duncan Falconer, who was in the SBS. So everything's incredibly accurate, and so that's one of the differences, and one of the great resources I had is I had a book to go to and a series of books and the real guys that do it.
So Stratton's the guy to, I wouldn't say replace Bond, but he's an alternative to Bond. Does that mean we can look forward to some more Stratton movies?
I hope so. I mean, as I said, there's 8 books, and I think it's a world that people haven't seen, especially the SBS, which is very secretive. People often know the SAS, but the SBS, the Navy equivalent, which is actually the first Special Forces, really, are very much more secretive, and people don't know about their operations, and they've been in constant use since the Second World War. They're never not working, if you see what I mean. So there's a huge amount of secret operations they've been on, and the variations, they are being obviously Special Boat Service and Navy. They're very water orientated, but they also do everything else, and so they're a fascinating group, very small group. There's not very many of them. You'd be very surprised how few there are in the SBS. But they're incredibly varied who's in it, they're incredibly varied in their skills, and also you would never spot an SBS officer or operative, but they just don't look like huge, great action men. They fade into the shadows, and they use their motto is through guile and courage, and so they use their guile much more than their muscles.
So you've got Dominic Cooper playing Stratton, and you've just said that SBS guys don't look like your normal sort of action man, if you like. And actually, I suppose Dominic Cooper you wouldn't necessarily associate with action roles. So why did you go for him? Was that the reason, or was there something more?
Well, I always want to look for a great actor to do any part or any character, whether it's action or dramatic. And Dominic is sort of something of a chameleon. He's really a character actor rather than a straight ahead, cookie cutter leading man. And when you see, you look at his body of work, you forget all the different roles he's had, from musicals to comedy to playing, Saddam Hussein's body double.
And he's been on stage and on TV.
Yeah,
as well,
there's nothing he can't do. And so to have that bag of tricks, that resource. I can put him in a world, or any actor in a world of pyrotechnics and roller coaster rides and everything. But ultimately, when you do the big close up and there's the emotional scene and you want to believe this character is real, you need a real actor. And people don't want, the audience I don't think want just stuff blowing up. They also want to believe that the person is real that's going through all this jeopardy. And Dominic is that consummate character actor, and so can take on this role. And also he fits the bill of an SBS officer, because they are like that. They're dropped into every country of the world, and they have to fade into the background, and they have to rely on their own resources, and they have to get along with people. They have to wheedle their way in. They're sort of very much the sort of subtle secret agent, but also can do all the exciting, deadly mission stuff. And Dominic is that guy. So
how did he take to a sort of very action orientated role?
Amazingly well, because whenever I do an action film, or a film that has a lot of action in it, and as I said, I don't cast anybody for their action chops. It's always for their acting chops, and so you never know what they can or can't do. And and in training, in the prep, they're trained by SBS officers and fight coordinators and all these people to find out what they're physically capable of. But what I didn't realise with Dominic is he's an incredible driver and an incredible jet boat driver as well. And so
handy.
Yeah, and so I planned these car chases through the streets of Rome, and I had stunt doubles and stuntmen to do it. And he was complaining that one of the films he'd done, they just stuck him in front of a green screen and he was sort of pretending to drive. And I said, well, go on, have a go then. And he was ripping around these tiny streets in Rome, these alleyways, with like a couple of inches either side of the car, and was phenomenal. And he had the other actor in the car with him, Austin Stoll, who was, I must say, was very brave to do that with another fellow actor, and he was leaning out, shooting his gun and everything, and they were having a great time. But there's nothing Dominic can't do with a car, which is phenomenal. And then after that, we went on to boat chases, and I was using special jet boats because they're safer. They don't have propellers, so that if anyone falls in the water, no one gets injured. They're much harder to drive than a normal speedboat, and amazingly, Dominic could do that. And we were racing through the canals of London, through Canary Wharf, underneath all the bankers, and again he was bouncing off the walls and firing guns and hanging out, and I didn't bargain or hire him for at all.
Is he just as good a swimmer as well? Thinking of the opening sequence.
Oh yeah. Well, he was very brave actually, because that was the worst thing I made them do. I think was because I invented this. I said, what's the worst thing could happen underwater? Instead of attacking giant submarines, I thought the worst thing could possibly would be asked to crawl through a water-filled pipe for 2 kilometers, with your air running out. And so we built these pipes, and they were really underwater. And Dominic and Tyler Hoechlin had to swim through these pipes, and it was very scary, I must admit. I wouldn't have done it, but fair dues. I mean, it wasn't. I think he scuba dived in the Canary Islands or the Caribbean or something. But this was not. This was in a cold tank in a warehouse, crawling through a waterlogged pipe for a long way. So very scary.
In which case he was very brave.
Yeah. We
talked earlier about the film having a very sort of British feel to it. A lot of your previous films have been much more Hollywood orientated, and they've been made over there. What's the difference between making a film over here and over there?
It's not that much difference anymore. It's such a global business. But I grew up on Hollywood films and loved the glamour and the size and the spectacle of them. And when I was growing up, British films were very small and very niche in a way like that, and they didn't have the big scope. Nowadays, I think British films, just is equal to Hollywood in scale and spectacle, as we've proven. But I think for me, it's the actors as much as anything, because there's such a huge pool of talent in the UK for actors, and I've grown up with most of them, so I don't have to kind of research who they are and what they've done, which I might have to do in America because I didn't necessarily grow up with those actors. I get to play, with or work with people that I grew up and idolised, like Derek Jacobi, was in the film, and
yes.
And I grew up watching like Claudius with him, and so to get to work with the great British actors is a bit of a dream.
And your next film is Tsunami LA?
Could be.
Which is what I've been reading about. What can you Tell me about that. Is shooting imminent for that one?
Well, we're just seeing. I'm not sure whether it will be next or when it will be, but it's basically what LA would look like after a tsunami hit it. So it's a story of a family who are separated once LA is submerged, and if you can imagine Los Angeles as a sort of waterlogged underwater theme park. It's how they get back together in a world that's in a city that's very familiar to them and to a lot of people, but now very different because it's 50 feet underwater, and but we'll see if that is the next.
Sounds a little bit like you're going back to Hollywood after having done a British film.
Yes, but as I said, I think it's an international business, and I would always prefer to do a film at home. I live in the UK and would love it, but something you just have to go with what is the next good piece of material, and you can't just say, well, I'm only going to work in the UK. But I'd always take a UK based or European based film over anywhere else in the world, so I can sleep in my own bed.
Simon West, thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome.